The last time Claire Westfield promised herself she would never come back to a place like this. She meant it with her whole heart. Yet here she was again, standing where worry becomes fear, because her younger brother had gone quiet, and silence, when it comes from someone you love, never stays harmless for long. Let me take you back to where it all began. Claire did not travel to the base to prove anything or to fix anyone. She came because Nathan's voice had faded little by little, because his messages grew short, because a sister knows when goodbye is hiding inside normal words. When she saw him at the gate, she smiled first so he would not see the weight she carried. And when he hugged her, she felt how hard he was holding on, not just to her, but to whatever strength he had left. "You didn't have to come," Nathan said, trying to sound calm, and she answered, "I know," because that was easier than saying she was afraid. They walked together, and Claire noticed how he leaned just slightly as he moved, how he avoided turning his body too fast. And although she said nothing, her chest tightened, because this was how it always started, small signs that begged not to be named. A dog followed them at a careful distance, watching Claire with eyes that seemed older than his body. And when she stopped, the dog stopped too, as if he understood pauses better than words. "That's Ranger," Nathan said, and Claire nodded, because she already felt something steady and honest in the way the dog stayed close without asking for anything. Inside the base, people smiled and spoke loudly, yet their hands moved too fast, and their jokes came a little late, and Claire helped where she could, wrapping bandages, steadying breaths, listening more than she spoke, because helping was the only thing that made her feel like herself again. Later, when the lights flickered and the radios failed one by one, no one panicked, but Claire felt it in her bones, that slow knowing that trouble does not announce itself. It simply arrives, and by the time the ground shifted beneath their feet, she was already running, not away, but straight toward the place where people would need her most, unaware that the night was about to ask her for something she once swore she would never give again. She did not know then that the choice she was making was not about running toward danger, but about refusing to turn away from people who needed her, because that had always been her weakness and her strength at the same time. As Claire moved through the dust and broken light, voices reached her from different corners, some sharp with fear, some low with pain, and others already too quiet, and she answered each one with the same steady tone, telling them to stay with her, telling them help was coming, even when she did not yet know how true that was. Ranger stayed close, never in the way, never rushing, only stopping when Claire stopped, as if he understood that speed without care only makes things worse. She found a young man sitting against a wall, his face pale, his hands shaking as he tried to hold pressure on his leg, and when she knelt beside him, he looked at her like she was the last solid thing left in the world. "You're going to be fine," she said, not as a promise, but as a guide, because calm travels faster than fear when someone believes it. He nodded, and his breathing slowed, and Claire felt that old pull again, the part of her that knew exactly what to do without asking permission from her thoughts. As she moved on, she saw Nathan ahead, lifting debris with another soldier, both of them straining too hard, and her heart tightened because she recognized the look on his face, the look of someone pushing past pain because stopping feels worse. "Nathan," she called, and he turned, surprised to see her there, his eyes searching her face for answers she did not yet have. "You shouldn't be here," he said again, louder this time, but she shook her head and replied, "Neither should anyone who needs help, but here we are." And he almost smiled, almost, before another deep movement rolled through the ground beneath them. The walls groaned, not loud, not sudden, but heavy, like something giving up after holding on for too long, and Ranger let out a low sound, not fear, not warning, just awareness, and began pulling Claire gently in another direction. "What is it, boy?" she said under her breath, following without thinking, because instincts do not ask for proof. They moved toward the outer side of the compound, where the old structures stood, the ones no one trusted fully but no one questioned anymore. And as they approached the base of the water tower, Claire felt something shift inside her, because she understood balance, not just in bodies, but in buildings, and she knew when one thing fails, others follow. The tower stood above them, tall and tired, its metal frame worn by years of weather and neglect, and as another tremor passed through the ground, she heard it complain in a way that made her stomach drop. Nathan caught her arm. "What are you thinking?" he asked, his voice tight, and she looked at him, really looked, at the brother who used to follow her everywhere, who trusted her to lead even when she was just guessing. "I think this is where it breaks," she said softly, and he followed her gaze upward, swallowing hard. They moved closer, stepping around fallen tools and loose cables, and that was when Claire saw the launcher mounted to the wall, old emergency equipment meant for gaps and rescues, not for moments like this, and her hands went still as memory rushed in without warning. She saw another night, years ago, another place where choices had no clean answers, and she felt again the weight of what saving can cost when it asks you to become someone you tried to leave behind. "Claire," Nathan said, quieter now, and she knew he could hear the change in her breathing. "You don't have to do this," he added, because brothers know when fear is trying to sound like reason. She closed her eyes for a second, then opened them, meeting his gaze, and said, "I know," because that was the truth, and also the lie she could no longer afford. Ranger sat at her side, steady and close, and Claire placed her hand on his head, grounding herself in the simple fact that she was not alone. Around them, voices called for help, metal strained, and time moved in that strange way it does when everything important is happening at once. And Claire reached for the launcher, not with confidence, but with acceptance, because sometimes courage is not loud, it is just the refusal to walk away. She lifted the launcher slowly, feeling its weight settle into her hands, and although it was not heavy, it carried more than metal ever should, because it asked her to decide how much of herself she was willing to lose to keep others alive. Nathan watched her closely, saying nothing now, because he knew that this was not a moment for words, and Ranger stayed pressed against her leg, steady and warm. A quiet reminder that some things stay with you even when everything else shakes apart. Claire checked the line with care, not rushing, not pausing too long either, because panic hides in both extremes, and as she looked up at the tower, she noticed details that confirmed what her body already knew: loose bolts where there should be none, marks where tools had scraped metal, signs of hands that worked quickly and then left, and that truth settled in her chest like a stone, because this was not age or chance, this was done. She aimed the launcher upward, adjusting her stance the way she used to, feet firm, breath steady, shoulders squared not against fear but against doubt, and for a brief moment she felt like she was standing in two lives at once, the one she built after leaving and the one she never fully escaped. "If it holds," Nathan said quietly, "what do you need me to do?" And she looked at him with a mix of pride and pain, because even now he was ready to help before protecting himself. "Stay here," she said, "and if it doesn't run," and he shook his head, because brothers do not like orders from sisters, especially when they sound like goodbye. "Nathan," she added, her voice soft but firm, "trust me." And he exhaled slowly before nodding, because trust, once earned, does not disappear just because time has passed. Claire pulled the trigger and the line shot upward, fast and clean, catching against the upper frame with a jolt that traveled down her arms and into her chest. And for one terrible second she thought it would slip, but it held, biting into place as if it understood what was being asked of it. The tower groaned, responding to the new tension, and Claire did not wait, because waiting gives fear room to grow, and she clipped herself in, testing the line once, twice, before beginning the climb. The wind pushed against her as she rose, carrying the smell of broken fuel and dust, and below her the base looked smaller, not safer, just farther away, and as she climbed higher, the sounds of shouting blurred into a single low hum, like the city itself was holding its breath. Her hands burned where the metal scraped skin, and her shoulder throbbed with every pull, but pain was familiar, manageable, something she could work around, and she focused instead on each movement, each reach, each steady shift of weight, because staying present was the only way forward. Halfway up, the tower shuddered again, harder this time, and Claire froze, pressing herself close to the frame, feeling the vibration travel through bone and muscle, and she whispered under her breath, not a prayer, not a promise, just a plea to anything listening to give her one more chance to finish what she started. When the shaking eased, she continued, slower now, aware that the structure was tired and that tired things fail without warning. And as she reached the top platform, her boots touched down with a dull scrape that felt louder than it should have. She stood there for a moment, bent forward, hands on her knees, breathing through the ache in her body, and when she looked around, the truth hit her fully, because the damage was worse up close, supports loosened, balance thrown off, a slow collapse waiting for the right moment. Claire moved to the manual valve, gripping it with both hands, and when she tried to turn it, it resisted, stiff and unyielding, and frustration flared, sharp and hot, because she did not have time for stubborn metal. She adjusted her grip and tried again, muscles straining, teeth clenched, and this time it moved, only a little, but enough to tell her it was possible, and she leaned into it, ignoring the way her palms slipped, ignoring the sting as skin tore, because blood is loud only when you let it be. Below her, she could hear Nathan shouting her name, could hear others shouting too, but the words blurred together, because her focus narrowed to the slow turn of the valve and the fragile hope that it would be enough. The tower screamed then, not like a sound, but like a feeling, a deep vibration that rattled through her chest and down her spine, and Claire felt the line go tight, felt the structure resist its own failure, and she kept turning, counting breaths, because counting keeps you from thinking about what happens if you stop. When the valve finally locked into place, the shaking eased, not fully, but enough, and Claire sagged against the railing, heart pounding, hands bleeding, body trembling with the aftershock of effort and fear. She allowed herself 1 second of relief, one shallow laugh that caught in her throat, and then the line snapped. The sound was sharp and final, and before she could react, the world tilted, the platform vanished beneath her feet, and she fell, not screaming, not thinking, just reaching out instinctively for something that was no longer there. The impact came hard and sudden, knocking the air from her lungs, and darkness closed in before she could name the pain spreading through her body. When Claire woke, rain was falling lightly on her face, cool and steady, and for a moment she thought she was back home, half asleep on her porch after a long day. But then she tried to move and pain answered sharply, grounding her in the present. Ranger's face filled her view, his eyes focused, his body pressed close, and when she turned her head slightly, she saw Nathan beside her, trapped beneath a beam. His face pale but his chest rising and falling, and relief washed through her so strong it hurt. "Hey," she said, her voice rough, and his eyes opened, finding hers with a weak smile. "You always land hard," he whispered, and she almost laughed, because even now he was trying to make it easier for her. The night stretched on strangely after that, time bending and slowing, and Claire talked to keep him awake, telling stories from when they were kids, reminding him of things he loved, while Ranger stayed between them, a solid presence against the cold ground. Nathan listened, eyes half closed, and when she paused, he said softly, "I was scared you'd disappear again," and her chest tightened, because this was the truth she had avoided. "I didn't disappear," she replied. "I just didn't know how to stay without breaking." And he nodded, understanding more than she expected. Eventually, distant voices grew closer, lights cut through the rain, and hands reached down to free them. And as Claire was lifted onto a stretcher, exhaustion finally claimed her, pulling her under not into darkness this time, but into a quiet that felt earned. The ride out felt longer than it should have, not because of distance, but because Claire's body had begun to let go of the tight control it held all night. And when that happened, every ache spoke at once. Yet she stayed awake, forcing her eyes to follow the ceiling lights as they passed, because sleeping felt too close to slipping away. Someone kept talking to her, a steady voice asking simple questions, and she answered when she could, nodding when words felt heavy, while Ranger stayed close, his head resting near her shoulder, refusing to move even when hands tried to guide him away. "Let him stay," Claire murmured, and the voice agreed, because some rules are softer than others when lives have already been bent enough. At the field hospital, the air was sharp with antiseptic and wet clothing, and Claire watched Nathan being taken in another direction, her hand reaching out until she could no longer see him, and only then did fear finally break through the wall she had built, sharp and sudden, making her gasp. "He's alive," someone said quickly, seeing the panic in her eyes. "He's hurt, but he's alive." And she nodded, clinging to those words like a lifeline, repeating them silently until her breathing slowed again. They cleaned her hands, stitched where skin had split, wrapped her shoulder, and spoke in calm tones that reminded her too much of herself in another life. And as they worked, memories tried to surface, old faces, old places, moments where help came too late, but she pushed them aside, focusing instead on the weight of Ranger's presence, the simple truth of his warmth against her side. When they finally left her alone, Claire lay staring at the canvas ceiling, listening to the sounds of people moving, equipment shifting, voices rising and falling, and she realized how tired she was, not just in her body, but in her bones, the kind of tired that comes from carrying too much for too long. Nathan came later, his leg wrapped, his face drawn but awake, and when he saw her, relief softened his features in a way that made her throat tighten. "You scared me," he said quietly, sitting beside her bed, and she managed a weak smile. "You started it," she replied, and he shook his head, reaching for her hand carefully, as if afraid she might break. They sat like that for a while, saying nothing, because sometimes silence is not empty. It is full of things that do not need to be spoken yet. Eventually, a man arrived who did not wear the same tired look as the others, his clothes cleaner, his posture too controlled, and Claire recognized the type immediately, the kind that appears after the danger has passed but before the questions settle. He asked her name, confirmed details he already knew, and when he spoke about her past, about skills she had not used in years, she felt something close inside her, a door she had worked hard to seal. "I'm not that person anymore," she said firmly, and he studied her for a moment before nodding, though his eyes suggested he did not fully agree. "You were today," he replied, not unkindly, and left her with that truth hanging between them. When he was gone, Claire turned to Nathan, expecting questions, but he only squeezed her hand and said, "You saved people," as if that explained everything, and maybe it did. Dawn came slowly, pale light filtering through the tent walls, and with it came a strange calm, the kind that follows chaos not because things are fixed, but because there is nothing left to do in that moment. Claire watched Ranger sleep at the foot of her bed, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm, and she felt a quiet gratitude settle in her chest, not loud or overwhelming, just present. She knew this night would follow her, knew the sounds and feelings would return when things were quiet again. But she also knew something else now, something she had been afraid to admit, that leaving had not erased who she was, and coming back had not destroyed who she had become. As the base began to stir again, people moving carefully through what remained, Claire closed her eyes for a brief moment, not to escape, but to rest, because for the first time in a long while, she felt like she had faced the past without losing herself to it. And that was enough to carry her forward, even as the weight of what had happened settled in, slow and steady, waiting to be understood. When Claire opened her eyes again, the light had shifted, softer now, and for a moment she could not tell if it was morning or just another lamp turned low to let people rest. And that small confusion made her chest tighten, because she had learned long ago that calm can be fragile. She tested her fingers first, then her arm, moving slow, listening to what her body allowed, and although pain answered back, it stayed within limits she understood, which gave her a strange sense of relief. Ranger lifted his head at once, watching her closely, and when she met his eyes, she felt steady again, because he did not ask questions or expect answers, he simply stayed. A nurse passed by and smiled when she saw Claire awake, asking how she felt, and Claire answered honestly, "Sore, but here," and the nurse nodded as if that was enough for now. Nathan slept nearby, his breathing even, his face drawn but peaceful, and Claire watched him for a while, noticing the small crease between his brows that had been there since childhood, the one that appeared when he worried but refused to say so. She remembered teaching him how to ride a bike, how he kept saying he was fine even after falling, and how she learned early that love sometimes means letting people try, even when you want to protect them from every bruise. When Nathan woke, he looked at her first, not the room, not the people moving around them, and his relief was so open that it made her turn away for a second, because she was not ready to carry that yet. "You stayed," he said, more statement than question, and she answered, "So did you," because that felt fair. They talked quietly after that, about small things, about home, about food they missed, about nothing important, and yet every word carried the weight of what they had not said. The truth that both of them had come close to losing something they were not ready to let go of. Ranger shifted closer to Nathan, resting his head against the side of the bed, and Nathan smiled, reaching down with care. "He didn't leave us?" Nathan said, and Claire replied, "He knew where he was needed," because sometimes animals understand what people take too long to accept. As the hours passed, the base outside changed, not fully back to normal, but quieter, more careful, as if everyone was moving with new awareness, and Claire felt that shift too, The way people looked at her differently now, not with praise but with recognition, and that unsettled her more than any thanks could have. A few stopped to say simple things, "Thank you," or "You helped my friend." And Claire nodded, accepting their words without holding on to them, because she knew how easily gratitude can turn into expectation, and she was not ready for that. Later, when Nathan was taken for scans, Claire sat alone for a while, Ranger still close, and that was when the memories tried again, not loud or sharp, but steady, bringing back the night she left the service. The moment she decided she could not keep living in places where saving one person meant losing another part of herself. She pressed her palms together, grounding herself in the present, reminding herself that this was different, that she had chosen to be here, that she had not been sent or ordered or trapped by duty, and that choice mattered more than she once believed. The man from earlier returned briefly, standing at a respectful distance, speaking in a low voice about reports and questions that would come later, and when he left he said, "We may need to talk again," and Claire answered, "Maybe," because honesty does not always need more words. As evening settled, Claire was cleared to sit up, then to stand with help, and the simple act of putting her feet on the ground again felt heavier than she expected, because standing means continuing, and continuing means accepting that this night would not end cleanly. Nathan returned with a tired smile, his legs supported, and they shared a quiet look that held more understanding than any conversation could. "When I get out of here," he said softly, "I'm taking leave." And Claire nodded, feeling a mix of relief and guilt, because she knew part of that choice came from what he had seen her do. "Come home," she said, and he answered, "I plan to." And for the first time since she arrived, the thought of home did not feel distant or fragile, but real. As darkness returned outside, Claire walked slowly to the edge of the tent with Ranger beside her, looking out at the base, at the broken places marked for repair, at the tower standing still now, scarred but upright, and she felt something settle inside her, not peace, but acceptance, the kind that comes when you stop arguing with who you are. She knew this was not the end of what the night had started. New questions would follow, and choices too. But as she turned back toward Nathan and the small circle of light they shared, she understood that for now, she had done what she came to do, and that was enough, even as a quiet thought lingered at the edge of her mind. The sense that the city had not taken its final breath yet, and that what waited beyond this moment would ask her to decide, once again, how much she was willing to give. She stayed there longer than she meant to, standing near the edge of the tent, watching people move through the half-light with careful steps, because after a night like that, no one trusted the ground the same way again. Ranger sat at her feet, calm, alert, as if he understood that danger does not always end when the noise fades. Claire rubbed her sore shoulder and let out a slow breath, reminding herself that she was here, that her body still answered her, that Nathan was alive, and that mattered more than the questions waiting ahead. When she returned to Nathan's side, he was awake, staring at the ceiling with the same look he used to have as a boy when he was trying to work something out on his own. "What are you thinking about?" she asked quietly, sitting down, and he took a moment before answering, choosing his words with care. "I keep replaying it," he said. "Not the falling part, but the moment before, when everything could have gone either way." And Claire nodded, because she knew that space well, the narrow place where choice lives. "That moment never really leaves," she said, "but it changes." And he turned his head to look at her, curious. "How?" he asked, and she hesitated, then answered honestly. "You stop seeing it as what almost broke you, and start seeing it as what showed you who you are." And although she was not sure she fully believed it yet, saying it out loud felt like a step toward something lighter. They talked then about their mother, about how she used to sit at the kitchen table long after everyone else had gone to bed, just thinking, and how neither of them ever really understood her until now. And as they spoke, Claire felt the knot in her chest loosen just a little, because grief shared becomes something you can hold without being crushed. A medic came by to check Nathan's vitals, smiling softly when she saw them talking, and said, "You both did good," before moving on, and Claire watched her go, wondering when doing good became something that scared her so much. Later, as the night deepened, the sounds outside grew fewer, replaced by the low murmur of generators and the steady movement of guards doing quiet rounds. And Claire realized how much she had missed the simple human closeness, sitting beside someone she loved without needing to explain herself. Ranger shifted closer to Nathan, resting his head near his hand, And Nathan smiled again. That easy smile that reminded Claire of summers long past, when worries were smaller and trust came without effort. "You know," Nathan said after a while, "I always told myself you left because you were braver than me." And Claire felt a sting behind her eyes, because she had told herself the opposite. "I left because I was tired," she replied softly, "and because I was afraid of what staying would turn me into." And he nodded, accepting that truth without judgment, because siblings know each other's shadows as well as their light. The hours passed in small pieces, broken by checks and quiet conversations, and when exhaustion finally pulled at Claire again, she allowed herself to rest, not fully asleep, but not fully awake either, drifting in that space where thoughts soften and memories lose their sharp edges. In that drifting, she felt the night replay not as a storm, but as a series of choices, each one leading to the next, and she understood that while she could not change what had happened, she could choose how it would live inside her. When she opened her eyes again, Ranger was watching the tent entrance, ears angled forward, and although nothing seemed wrong, Claire felt a familiar alertness settle over her. Not fear, but readiness, and she wondered if that part of her would ever truly rest. A guard stepped in to say that repairs would take time, that some would be moved out soon, that questions would be asked later, and Claire thanked him, knowing that answers often come long after the need for them. As dawn began to hint at the horizon again, pale and uncertain, Claire sat up, feeling the ache in her body as proof that she was still present, still part of this world, and she looked at Nathan, sleeping again, and Ranger, steady as ever, and felt a quiet resolve take shape. She had come here thinking she was just visiting, just checking in, just easing a worry, but she was leaving with something heavier and clearer, the understanding that some parts of you are not meant to be buried, only carried with care. And as the base slowly prepared for what came next, Claire knew that whatever waited beyond this place would not catch her unready, because she had faced the night and come through, not unchanged, but still whole, and that truth stayed with her as the first full light of morning finally reached the broken city, promising nothing, but offering the chance to keep going. As the morning settled in fully, Claire felt the weight of the night shift into something quieter but heavier, like a question that refuses to leave even when the answer is already known. She stood with care, testing her balance, and although her body protested, it did not stop her, which felt important, because stopping now would make everything harder later. Ranger rose with her, close enough that she could feel his presence without looking, and together they stepped outside the tent, where the base looked smaller than it had before, not weaker, just more honest. People moved slowly, speaking in low voices, meeting each other's eyes longer than usual, and Claire recognized that look, the one that says, "We are still here, and that has to be enough." She watched a group clear debris near the tower, marking unsafe spots with tape and quiet warnings, and she felt a strange mix of relief and sadness seeing it still standing, because it reminded her that survival often leaves marks that never fully fade. A woman approached her then, older, with tired eyes and steady hands, and said, "My sister made it out because you held that place together." And Claire nodded, thanking her, though the words felt too small for what had passed between strangers that night. When Nathan joined her, moving carefully with help, Claire felt the familiar pull to shield him, but she stopped herself, knowing he needed space to stand on his own, even now. "I don't want you to leave yet," he said quietly, not asking, just sharing the thought, and she answered, "I'm not going anywhere today, because sometimes staying one more day is a promise you can keep." They sat together on a low step near the medical area. Ranger stretched between them, and for a while they watched the base wake up, the slow work of repair beginning, and Claire realized that healing, like building, starts with small, careful movements, not grand plans. Nathan broke the silence after a time, saying, "When you climbed up there, I thought I was watching you disappear." And Claire swallowed before replying, "I thought the same thing, because truth shared late is still truth." He looked at her then, really looked, and said, "I'm glad you didn't." And that simple sentence settled deep in her chest, easing something she did not know she was still holding. Later, as arrangements were made and transport planned, Claire was asked again about staying on, about helping with training or support, and she listened without interrupting, then declined without anger because she knew the difference between refusing out of fear and refusing out of clarity. When the questioners left, Nathan squeezed her hand and said, "I'm proud of you. And for a moment she did not know how to respond, because pride had always felt complicated between them. But she finally said, "That means more than you think," and meant it fully. As the day wore on, Claire felt tired in a way that sleep alone would not fix. Yet she also felt lighter, as if facing the night had loosened something that had been tight for years. Ranger stayed with her through it all, moving when she moved, resting when she rested, and she wondered briefly where he would go once things settled, whether he had a handler waiting or if he would be reassigned, and the thought of him being moved away brought an unexpected ache. When she asked quietly, someone told her Ranger would be evaluated later, and Claire nodded, filing the thought away, because not all worries need to be solved at once. As evening approached again, casting long shadows across the base, Claire found herself standing once more near the edge of the compound, looking out toward the city beyond, and she felt the familiar tension rise, not sharp, not urgent, but present, reminding her that places like this do not let go easily. Nathan joined her, leaning lightly on the railing, and said, "It feels different now," and she replied, "It always does after." Because after is where people live, even when before still echoes. They stood there quietly, sharing the space without filling it, and Claire understood that this visit had changed something between them, not by fixing everything, but by making room for honesty, and that felt like a kind of rescue all its own. As night came on again, calmer but still watchful, Claire returned to her bunk, knowing sleep might come easier now, and as she lay down with Ranger nearby, she felt the story of the night settle into her, not as a wound, but as a reminder that saving does not always look like healing, and staying does not always mean never leaving, and that sometimes the hardest part of survival is accepting that you did what you could, and that it mattered. She woke before the lights came on, not because of a sound, but because her body had learned to rise before questions arrived. For a moment she lay still, listening to her own breathing, steady and slow, and she let herself believe that this morning would not ask too much of her. Ranger was already awake, watching the tent opening with quiet focus, and when Claire sat up, he shifted closer without being called, his presence saying more than words ever could. She swung her legs down, feet touching the ground, and the ache reminded her that she was still inside the same story, not after it, not before it, but right in the middle. Outside, the base was already moving, not rushed, not calm either, just careful, like people who had learned overnight that strength can slip if you don't pay attention. Claire walked slowly, greeting faces she now recognized, people who nodded at her not with praise, but with a shared look that said, "We were there together," and that mattered. She passed building A, now marked and quiet, and paused without meaning to, because places hold memory even when people try not to. Ranger stopped too, sitting beside her, and she rested her hand on his back, grounding herself again in something solid. Nathan met her near the medical unit later, using a crutch now, his steps uneven but determined, and when she saw him moving on his own, relief washed over her in a way she hadn't expected, because it felt like watching a future take shape instead of imagining a loss. "They're talking about moving some of us out soon," he said, keeping his voice low, and Claire nodded, knowing that change always follows damage, whether people are ready or not. "You'll come home first," she said, not as a suggestion, but as a plan, and he smiled faintly, because having a plan feels like safety when everything else is uncertain. They shared a simple meal, eating slowly, talking about small things again, like weather back home, like neighbors, like food they missed, and Claire noticed how those ordinary details stitched something back together inside her, piece by piece. Later in the day, she was asked once more to give her account, and she did, calmly, clearly, without drama, because the truth did not need to be dressed up to carry weight. And when it was over, she felt lighter, as if saying it out loud had taken some of its hold away. Ranger waited outside, and when she stepped out, he stood and followed her without question. And she wondered, not for the first time, whether he had chosen her as much as she had leaned on him. As the afternoon wore on, Claire found herself thinking less about the fall and more about the moments before it. The choice, the acceptance, and she realized that what haunted her was not the danger, but the clarity, the way everything else fell away when it mattered, leaving only what was true. That clarity scared her because it felt familiar, because it whispered that she could still do this, that she was still capable of stepping into places she had sworn to leave behind, and she did not yet know what she would do with that knowledge. When evening came again, softer than the last, Claire sat with Nathan near the edge of the base, watching the sky darken without fear, and he said quietly, "I don't think I ever thanked you properly." And she looked at him, shaking her head. "You don't have to," she said. "Just come home." And he nodded, because sometimes gratitude sounds better when it looks like a promise. Ranger lay at their feet, relaxed now, his guard lowered just enough to rest, and Claire felt a small smile touch her lips, because that felt like progress. As night settled in, Claire returned to her bunk, tired but not hollow, and as she lay down, she knew sleep would not erase what had happened, but it might soften it. And as her eyes closed, one thought stayed with her, quiet but steady, that she had come here thinking she was only visiting. But visits can change you, especially when they remind you of who you have always been, even when you try to forget. By the time night returned for the third time since Claire arrived, the base felt changed, not repaired, not healed, just aware of its own weakness. Lights worked in some places and failed in others, and people learned which paths to trust by memory instead of signs. Claire noticed that everyone walked differently now, slower, more careful, as if the ground itself had earned their respect. She sat beside Nathan while he slept again, his breathing steady, his face softer than it had been when she first arrived, and she realized that this, more than anything else, was why she came, not to fix the base, not to prove she could still act, but to see her brother rest without fear written across his face. Ranger lay stretched near the bed, finally allowing himself to relax fully, and Claire watched him for a long moment, wondering how an animal could understand when to hold tension and when to release it better than most people. A quiet knock came at the tent entrance, and when she looked up, it was not medical staff this time, but the same man from before, the one who carried questions like they belonged to him. He did not step inside, only spoke from the opening, respectful but firm, telling her that some findings had come back, that the damage to the tower was not random, that tools had been used with purpose, and that what happened was not finished, only paused. Claire listened without interrupting, because she had already known this in her bones, and when he finished, she asked one simple question, "Is my brother safe?" And when he answered yes, for now, she nodded, because that was the only answer that mattered. After he left, Claire sat still for a long time, feeling the truth settle in, that the night had not been an ending, only a beginning that wore the shape of survival. She thought about the launcher in her hands, the moment she accepted what she was doing, and she understood that the choice had changed her again, not back into who she was before, but into someone who could no longer pretend she was done with hard decisions. When Nathan stirred and opened his eyes, she smiled at him, hiding the weight of what she had learned, because some truths are not meant to be shared all at once. "You look like you're thinking too much," he said softly, and she replied, "I always do." And that made him smile, because it was familiar, because it was her. She helped him sit up, adjusted his blanket, and when he reached for her hand, she let him, because staying is sometimes just that, letting someone hold on. Outside, the tower stood in the dark, quiet but not forgotten, and Claire knew that when she finally left this place, it would not release her the way she once hoped it would. As she lay back down later, Ranger close, Nathan resting, and the base settling into another uneasy night, one thought stayed with her, steady and clear, that saving people does not end when the noise stops, and that whatever had set this night in motion was still out there, waiting, and when it returned, it would remember the woman who climbed when others could not. Claire stood at the edge of the base before sunrise, holding a small bag she had packed without thinking too much about what went inside. Nathan was still asleep behind her, Ranger sitting close, watching the road that led out. This was supposed to be the end of her visit. She had done what she came to do. Her brother was alive. The night had passed. That should have been enough. Yet something inside her refused to settle, because leaving now felt too clean for what they had just survived. She told herself she could go home. She could return to teaching calm breathing and first aid to people who had never seen a building give up under their feet. She could sleep in her own bed and pretend that the pull she felt was just old memory, not present truth. But as she looked back at the base, at the tower standing scarred and silent, she understood that pretending had always been her weakest defense. Ranger shifted beside her, standing now, his body angled toward the base instead of the road. Claire noticed it without surprise. "You're not ready to go either," she said quietly, and the words were as much for herself as for him. Nathan joined her moments later, moving carefully, leaning on his support, his face still tired but clear. "They told me I'm being moved out later today," he said, and she felt relief rise before she could stop it. "Good," she replied, then added, "I'll stay until you do," because that felt honest. They sat together on a low step, watching the base wake again, and this time Claire noticed details she had missed before. Small marks near doors, places where things had been moved and put back wrong, patterns that did not belong to accident or damage alone. She did not say anything at first. She had learned that rushing truth makes people turn away. Later that morning, while Nathan was taken for final checks, Claire walked the outer path again, slowly, with Ranger at her side. People greeted her now not as a visitor, not as a hero, but as someone who had been tested alongside them. She stopped near the tower, keeping a respectful distance, and crouched to look at the ground. There were fresh prints there, not from rescue teams, not from repair crews, but from earlier, pressed deep and deliberate. Claire felt her stomach tighten, not with fear, but with certainty. Someone had been there before she arrived. Someone had planned for collapse, not chaos. Someone had expected people to be trapped. The thought followed her as she returned to the medical area, and when the same man from before approached her again, this time he did not speak first. He waited. Claire appreciated that. "You found something," she said, and he nodded. "Enough to know this wasn't random," he replied, then paused, choosing his words carefully. "We don't think it's finished." Claire looked past him, toward where Nathan rested, then back again. "I'm not here to join anything," she said calmly. "I won't." And the man accepted that without argument. "I'm not asking you to," he answered, then added, "I'm asking you to tell me what you see." That was harder. They walked together, slowly, Claire pointing out the details others might miss, explaining balance and pressure in simple terms, not as an expert, but as someone who had lived inside failure long enough to recognize its shape. She did not give orders. She did not take control. She only shared what she knew, and in doing so, she felt something loosen inside her, because helping did not have to mean returning to who she used to be. By afternoon, the base began preparing for movement. Nathan's transport was ready. Claire helped him pack what little he carried, folding clothes with care, because doing something normal helped keep fear quiet. "You're thinking of staying longer, aren't you?" Nathan said gently, not accusing, just noticing, and she did not deny it. "I don't know yet," she replied, and he nodded, because uncertainty was something they now shared. When the transport finally came, Claire walked Nathan to it, Ranger following close. They hugged longer than they had the first time, both of them aware of what had almost been lost. "Come home," Nathan said again, and this time Claire answered, "I will," without hesitation. As the vehicle pulled away, Claire stood watching until it disappeared, then turned back toward the base, toward the tower, toward the questions that still waited. Ranger stood beside her, steady as ever, and Claire realized that saving did not always end with leaving, and staying did not always mean fighting. Sometimes it meant choosing not to look away when you already knew the truth. The city beyond the fence remained quiet, but Claire no longer mistook quiet for peace. She took a breath, squared her shoulders, and stepped back inside, not as a visitor anymore, but as someone who understood that the hardest part of survival is deciding what you do with the life you get back. And somewhere beyond the broken streets, whatever had set the night in motion was still there, watching, waiting, and this time, Claire was no longer pretending she could ignore it. Claire did not announce that she was staying. She simply did not leave. That choice settled into her quietly, like something she had already agreed to long before her mind caught up. She walked back through the base with Ranger beside her, noticing how the place felt less like a stop and more like a question. People were still tired, still careful, but they were also watching each other more closely now, speaking softer, listening longer. Claire recognized that shift. It happens after people survive something together and realize how thin the line was. She spent the next hours doing small things that mattered. She helped a young medic rewrap a hand that would not stop shaking. She showed another how to lift without hurting his back. She sat with someone who could not stop staring at the floor and did not rush them to speak. None of it looked important from the outside, yet each moment stitched the place back together a little. Ranger stayed near her through all of it. He followed without pulling, stopped without being told, and rested when she rested. At one point, a handler approached and asked softly about him, explaining there would be a review later, a decision to be made. Claire nodded, but something tightened in her chest at the idea of him being taken somewhere else, somewhere quieter, somewhere that might not understand him the way this place did. She did not argue. She only said, "He saved lives too." And the handler looked at Ranger for a long moment before replying, "I see that." As evening came again, Claire was asked to join a small meeting. Not command, not strategy, just people trying to understand what they had survived. She listened more than she spoke, answering questions when asked, careful not to turn herself into something she did not want to be. When someone said, "You knew what to do," she answered honestly, "I knew what not to ignore," and that felt closer to the truth. Later, alone for the first time that day, Claire sat near the base of the tower, keeping distance, respecting what it had taken and what it had given back. The metal was still, quiet now, but she could feel its memory in her bones. Ranger lay beside her, head on his paws, watching the dark streets beyond the fence. Claire rested her hands on her knees and allowed the memories she had been holding back to surface. Not all at once, not enough to drown her, just enough to be acknowledged. She remembered the night she left the service. The look on a young face she could not save. The way she walked away without turning back because if she had, she would have stayed too long. She had told herself leaving was the only way to live. Now she understood that leaving had been survival, not failure. And coming back, even briefly, did not erase the work she had done to heal. The man who carried questions found her again, this time without urgency. He told her quietly that the threat had not returned, that patrols were being adjusted, that repairs would continue. He did not ask her to commit to anything. Instead, he said, "If you choose to go, we'll understand." And that simple respect mattered more than any offer. Claire looked at Ranger, then at the tower, then toward the road Nathan had taken earlier. "I'm going home," she said at last, not as escape, but as choice, and the man nodded, accepting that without disappointment. That night, Claire slept more deeply than she had since arriving. Ranger slept nearby, finally relaxed, and for the first time in days, the city did not press in on her dreams. When morning came, she packed slowly, not rushing, not lingering. She said quiet goodbyes, thanked people who did not need thanks, and when she reached the gate, she paused. Ranger stood there with her. The handler approached and said simply, "He's being reassigned," then hesitated before adding, "If you're willing." Claire did not speak right away. She knelt instead, placing her hands on Ranger's shoulders, meeting his calm eyes. "You ready to come home?" she asked softly, and Ranger stood, steady and sure, as if the answer had never been in doubt. They left together. The drive was long and quiet, the kind that gives thoughts room to stretch. Claire did not try to solve everything. She did not promise herself she would never return to places like that again. She only promised that next time she felt the pull, she would listen without fear. When she reached home, the house felt smaller than she remembered, but warmer. She unpacked slowly, made tea, and sat on the floor with Ranger beside her, letting the silence exist without filling it. That night, when she lay down, she did not hear metal bending or walls straining. She heard only her own breath and the steady presence of a life saved walking the same path as hers. Days later, Nathan called. His voice was stronger. "I'm home," he said, and Claire closed her eyes, letting relief wash through her fully this time. "So am I," she replied. Claire returned to teaching, to quiet rooms and steady hands, but she taught differently now. She spoke about fear without hiding from it. She spoke about choice, about staying present when things feel like they might fall apart. She did not tell her students about the tower or the fall. She did not need to. The truth lived in how she moved, how she listened, how she stayed. Some nights, when the world felt heavy again, Claire stepped outside with Ranger and looked up, reminding herself that survival is not a single moment, but a series of choices made with care. She had not become who she once was. She had become someone who knew when saving meant acting, and when it meant letting go. And that was enough. Claire did not rush back into life as if nothing had happened. She let things return slowly, the way wounds actually heal. Mornings became simple again. Tea on the counter, shoes by the door, Ranger waiting without being told. The quiet no longer felt like something hiding trouble. Felt earned. Nathan came by often. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they didn't. They learned that being together did not always need words anymore. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the light fade, Nathan said, "You know, I used to think you left because you were stronger than everyone else." Claire smiled, not looking at him. "I left because I was human," she replied. Nathan nodded because now he understood the difference. Claire kept teaching, but she taught with more patience. When people panicked, she didn't rush them. When they froze, she stayed. She didn't promise safety. She promised presence. And that changed everything. Ranger became part of that life too, lying quietly during sessions, lifting his head only when someone needed grounding. People trusted him. Claire trusted herself again. Some nights, memories still came. Not loud, not sharp, just reminders. When they did, Claire didn't fight them anymore. She let them pass, knowing they no longer owned her. She had carried others through darkness, but she had also learned how to carry herself back. The base became a story people told without names. The tower stood somewhere far away, still marked, still standing. Claire didn't need to see it again. What mattered was what it had shown her. She did not need to be fearless. She only needed to be willing. One quiet afternoon, Claire watched Ranger sleep in the sun and felt something settle fully for the first time. She had not gone back to war. She had not run from it either. She had chosen her life, not out of fear, but out of clarity. Saving does not always mean holding on, and it does not always mean walking away. Sometimes saving means knowing when to stay, when to act, and when to finally rest. Claire Westfield had done all three. Thank you so much for staying with me until the very end of this story. If you enjoyed this story, I promise you will surely love the next one. This is crazier and more thrilling as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.